Well, after months of discussion, the prison task force has finally made its recommendation for a new men's prison to be built in Sioux Falls. However, the South Dakota Department of Corrections wants to continue to show the public why a new prison is needed. And today, KELOLAND's Lauren Solik was one of 8 journalists allowed behind the prison walls for a tour of areas that we haven't seen in recent memory.
In February, KELOLAND News was invited on an exclusive tour of the South Dakota State Penitentiary. However, our news crew was only allowed to film in certain areas of the prison. Today, myself and 7 other journalists were given a tour that was similar to that given to the members of the Project Prison Reset Task Force.
You know, there's been a lot of discussion about what goes on inside the institution. There's been a lot of discussion. We've heard feedback from offenders saying that we don't need a new institution, or family members of offenders saying that we don't need a new institution. Yet I wanted for all of you to see, I wanted you to see what the staff have to do, what the staff have to endure, the linear design of the facility.
We weren't allowed to have cameras or recording devices on the tour. However, photos were taken for us as we walked through the prison. In this photo, you can see our tour lined up in a tight hallway just outside a cell block on the 5th level of East Hall.
It's all straight up. There's no elevators. It's all steps. And as I said on the tour, the trays, their meal trays, get carried up all 5 flights by our staff. The medication boxes to deliver meds cell to cell, they all get carried up those stairs.
This photo was taken looking down one side of the 5th floor, where there are 20 cells with each holding 2 inmates. We were also taken to one of the shower rooms, where there might be 120 inmates at once, 60 showering and 60 waiting, but only 2 correctional officers. We were told the steam from the showers also often block the view of the security cameras. We also saw the basement rec area that includes a gym and weight room. One major concern for Wasco in this area is that the windows, like the one you see here, are made of regular glass that can easily be broken by inmates. As we walked through the prison and its work areas, Wasco wanted us to keep in mind one sentiment she shared with us both before and after the tour.
The benefit was for everybody to see what we've been talking about, to see what the legislators saw when we took them through. And as I said, you know what, it's not going to get any worse than it is. The only thing left for it to do is to fall over.
In Sioux Falls, Lauren Solik, KELOLAND News.
Following the tour, Secretary Kelly Wasco took questions from the media. Now, tomorrow night on KELOLAND News, we're going to hear from Wasco about the prison task force recommendation and what she'd like to see in a new men's prison facility.
Greetings, it's your host, Gabe Morales. I'm continuing with our coverage of Department of Corrections agencies across the United States. Today, we're going to cover both South and North Dakota DOC systems. The South Dakota Department of Corrections is the agency that operates prisons within the state and has its headquarters in Pierre. South Dakota State Penitentiary is located in northern Sioux Falls and was first constructed as a territorial prison in 1881. When South Dakota was granted statehood in 1889, it was passed over to the state. Although a large portion of the original buildings remain, numerous changes have occurred over the years. The main penitentiary contains 3 housing units. In October 2023, South Dakota Department of Corrections closed a real estate purchase of 2 160-acre parcels in Lincoln County, which I understand soon will replace the old penitentiary in Sioux Falls. The Mike Durfee State Prison opened under the name Springfield State Prison in 1984, with women prisoners first occupying it, with males being admitted a year later. It became an all-male facility in 1997 when women were transferred to the Harum Solom Public Safety Center in Pierre. The Mike Durfee State Prison and then renamed in 1999 for Mike Durfee, who had been with the school and was Deputy Director of the South Dakota Department of Corrections. The present South Dakota Women's Prison in Pierre has an inmate capacity of 452 and opened in fall of 1997. This facility hosts a mother and infant program and in the year 2018 introduced a methamphetamine addiction rehabilitation program. South Dakota executed 4 men between 1877 and admission to the Union in 1889. After that, 10 men were executed until the abolition of the state's death penalty in 1915. Each of these sentences were carried out by hanging. The only person to be given the electric chair was George Sitz, was put to death on April 8, 1947 at the South Dakota Pen. On January 1st, 1979, then-Governor Bill Janklow, who was mentioned in my Leonard Peltier video, signed the state's post-Furman death penalty statute. Since that time, all subsequent executions have been by lethal injection. First occurred in the year 2007 with the execution of inmate Elijah Page. That was the first execution carried out in South Dakota in over 60 years. As of November 2019, 5 condemned inmates, all white males, have been executed since capital punishment was reinstated. A further 2 men killed themselves while being placed on South Dakota's death row. There have been several riots or major disturbances at the South Dakota Pen over the years, including events in 1922, 1936, 1954, 1980, 81, 83, and 93. And there was a recent incident that I'll discuss here shortly. On August 17, 1922, prison inmates tried to murder Deputy Warden Arthur Muchow, stabbing him several times and attempting to cut his throat. They also kidnapped guard Martin Boosveen and Warden George T. Jameson. 4 inmates took Warden Jameson hostage, threatening to kill him if they were stopped, and fled the prison in a vehicle. They obtained another car at a nearby farm and drove to a church, where they were holed up for the day. They left Jameson there bound but unharmed, and he was able to free himself. The inmates were reported in numerous locations, and authorities set up an ambush on August 25, 1922, and fired upon their car, killing Henry Coffey, a black man who was in the front passenger seat. The other 3 men, all white prisoners, were captured and returned to prison, with life sentences added to their terms. They were released in 1944, however. On March 6, 1936, Warden Eugene Riley was one of 3 people to die after a prison break ended in a chase that erupted into firefights between escapees and law enforcement. Inmate Phil Ray was killed, as was Berlin Meisel, who along with his fiancée, Frida Rauch, was in a car that inmates attempted to hijack. Several other people were wounded in that incident. On October 11, 1954, a riot broke out because inmates were unhappy with their treatment by the guards, as well as the food that they were served and lack of adequate toilet facilities. 4 prison guards were taken hostage by about 250 inmates. Tear gas was deployed to end the riot. November 7, 1981, violence erupted again on top of the hill, as the prison is known. A handful of convicts armed with clubs, chains, and homemade knives attacked and injured 11 guards. Governor Bill Janklow responded in person and said that the unrest and violence were not related to a shortage of guards. There was another riot in May 1993, with more than 200 inmates participating and seizing control of a section of the prison and lighting fires. 2 guards were injured when they were beaten with a softball bat during a confrontation with inmates on the recreation yard. They were then taken to a hospital and treated. An investigation found that inmates, many who had been drinking Pruno inside the prison, demanded that a staff member be fired. And I guess when they were not, they rioted. Another riot occurred on April 12, 2011, when prison guard Ronald R.J. Johnson was murdered by 2 inmates during an escape attempt. It was Johnson's 63rd birthday, and he was supposed to have the day off, but was called in to work. He was very close to retirement and was a loyal employee who came to the prison for what turned out to be his final shift. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Corrections is the toughest job I ever worked. Not everybody has what it takes to do it. There was also a very serious incident at the pen that occurred in August 2023, when inmates Lester Monroe and Kyle Jones assaulted and attempted to murder correctional officers. Monroe was sentenced to an additional 35 years in prison, while Jones received 50 years after they both were tried and convicted in that case. And more recently, in May of 2025, a fight broke out in the maximum security building of the pen. This violence came less than a week after a protest over prison security and treatment of inmates. A series of fights took place at the same time in multiple sections of D Block of the Jameson Annex. Reports stated that at least 10 inmates were injured as a result of the violence. 5 were stabbed, with 3 of them being treated at outside hospitals. 2 others were treated in the prison infirmary. 5 others were attacked with blunt objects, fists, and feet, and an investigation into this incident found that gangs were heavily involved. Evidently, in this case, prisoners were angry over their computer tablets being taken away, which were used to communicate with people outside the prison. I'm not sure why they were taken away, but often it is because of misuse, and is considered a privilege, not a right. Evidently, DOC staff began a thorough search of the pen looking for contraband. And of course, many times inmates believe these types of searches are done as punishment, not due to safety and security. I don't know. I wasn't there, but I've seen it go both ways over my 30-plus year career. A civilian, Donna German, said that her son was seriously injured and had received 22 stab wounds. There was a lot of protests before and after, and a lot of talk about drugs and overdoses inside the prison as well. DOC officials confirmed that 2 deaths at the prison within a month, one at the Jameson facility and one at the pen, were investigated as overdoses. And at least 1 death was blamed on the synthetic cannabinoid commonly known as K2. South Dakota faces a severe drug crisis, with fentanyl leading the cause of overdose deaths on the outside and is also a big problem inside facilities, as well as methamphetamine, cocaine, and alcohol-related harm being issues. North Dakota also has a significant drug problem. The state has experienced a big growth in population, largely due to the fracking industry. Workers are often single males who get paid a lot of money and often spend it on vices during their time off. Drug dealers are happy to supply these bored men with drugs and prostitutes at high prices. Law enforcement works hard to intercept drug operations, as over 20% of North Dakota's population is known to have a substance abuse problem, ranking the state 5th nationally. The North Dakota Department of Corrections and Rehabilitations is a very small agency that provides prison services within the state. The North Dakota State Penitentiary is located in Bismarck and houses long-term inmates, often of higher security levels, and has a total capacity of 815. James River Correctional Center is a medium security facility that has a capacity of 420. Meanwhile, the Dakota Women's Correctional Rehab Center is located in New England, being established in 2003, and has a total capacity of 126. Like I stated previously, 24 inmates at the South Dakota State Pen were involved in the May 2025 riot.
4 inmates at the South Dakota State Penitentiary facing assault and riot charges now following a May 27th fight. The Attorney General's announcement yesterday alleges that those inmates are tied to 9 different gangs.
Tonight, Beth Warden breaks down gang activity in the penitentiary and why the Attorney General believes all inmates are safer right now than they were just a few weeks ago.
In a Department of Justice report from 1985, the South Dakota Department of Corrections was among 16 states claiming no gangs were present in the prison system. Attorney General Marty Jackley makes it clear that is not the case today.
The boys or the TBZs, the Red Brotherhood, which is RBH, the Gangster Disciplines, the GDs, the Bloods, the Crips, the Northside Mafia, the Warlords, the East River Skins, and the Vice Lords.
The May 27th unrest, now legally classified as a riot, appeared to be coordinated, according to investigators.
The charges include 24 inmates.
Sources working closely with the DOC tell me there are times gangs apply pressure on prison staff. Jackley makes one thing clear.
There were no correction officers involved in this charging decision.
A Department of Justice report lists the top gang activities behind bars as intimidation, trafficking drugs, assault, extortion, or abusing weak inmates, and for members to protect each other. Secretary of Corrections Kelly Wasco acknowledges their presence. I asked Wasco if a new prison layout could be beneficial. She says modern prisons assist in the effective management of these groups by allowing more options for separation and supervision through physical and security technologies. Nationwide, the top responses to gang activity in prisons include bus therapy, which is relocating a leader to another facility. But studies have shown putting a gang leader in solitary confinement is not a solution, as a new leader typically emerges to fill the void. A source tells me gang recruitment at the South Dakota State Penitentiary is a real thing. Jackley vows to fight any related crime.
It just became safer today because we've made it clear that the Attorney General is not going to tolerate criminal activity behind the walls.
Those I spoke to today with local prison gang knowledge are thankful for the absence of white supremacist gangs in our prisons. In Sioux Falls, Beth Warden, Dakota News Now.
Unlike the Nebraska Department of Correctional Services, who apparently avoids the subject of security threat groups and lacks transparency, South Dakota's Secretary of Corrections Kelly Wasco acknowledged that gangs have a presence in the system. In fact, when I joined the National Major Gang Task Force in 1994, a year after it formed, the majority of the state prison systems and major jails noted that they had security threat groups operating and trying to disrupt their systems. This was just post-1980s crack cocaine epidemic, and thousands of minor to mid-level drug dealers with gang connections had been arrested and incarcerated. So it seemed to me like it'd be pretty hard to deny this fact. But some still did. I guess they consider that if they admit they have a gang problem, then people might question who is in control of their facilities. Of course, staff are charged with safety and security of correctional facilities, but gangs will work very hard to try to circumvent that. I don't think there's anything wrong with admitting that fact. Contrary to some people's opinion, it doesn't mean that we let them run the facilities, but they will if they're not dealt with. I've covered most of these gangs mentioned in other videos, but one thing that makes South Dakota stand out to me, as well as North Dakota, is the numbers of Native American gangs.
The FBI calls it the silent crisis in Indian country. Crime related to gangs and drugs is on the rise on Native American reservations.
Last night, Keloland Investigates looked into the death of a young man, and while it's not known yet if gang activity was related, his death is suspicious. Tonight, Keloland's Angela Kennedy picks up the investigation on the Rosebud Reservation with young people who tell the shocking truth about how gang and drug life takes over.
Youth Appreciation Day at St. Francis School is a way to let kids know they matter on the Rosebud Sioux Reservation. Tribal elders know these attendees are the most vulnerable to be preyed upon by gangs.
A lot of these younger kids are impacted by that, gang violence. They, some identify with Crips or Bloods.
The gang mentality began infiltrating Native American reservations back in the 1990s. And over the years, their presence has grown here. But now they are recruiting members who are younger and younger. Is there a gang problem on this reservation?
I'd have to say yes, due to the fact that most of the families on reservations are gang associated with GDs or Bloods.
Keloland Investigates was allowed to speak openly with teenagers on the Rosebud Reservation about what they see happen with gangs. Their answers may shock you.
Because I live on the res, it's everywhere. It's just out there. It's easy to see it every day.
There's always at least one kid in the group that's in a gang. Maybe because we're easy targets.
Until I was 7, I grew up in a pretty good household until my dad started drinking. My mom lost her job. And they broke up.
Now, 17, Israel Sharpfish's life has been heavily influenced by gangs. He joined one at just 8 years old.
My dad wasn't around to be a father figure. My mom was an alcoholic at the time, and I didn't know what to do, so I just went out, used my anger, started fights, troubles, and I was getting picked on by gang members of GDs, and I just decided to become a Blood.
That led to Sharpfish trying meth at just 13.
I didn't know what the drug was. They said just try it out, so I tried it out, took a hit, and it was meth. At first I liked it, but I slowly seen what it did to families, how it destroyed homes. There's a lot of things that turns you against your own family members. They'll even dare you to kill someone.
For 16-year-old Devin Spotted Eagle, the problem started when his grandmother, who was raising him, died.
Before my grandma passed, I was in a good position to where school was the main thing, friends, everything was stable. And when she passed, it's just the foundation just completely went under.
He was 15 and homeless.
A lot of places where I'd stay at and stuff, or ask people where I wouldn't have no place to stay, there's a lot of drug use.
Our gang problem turned into more of a drug problem, a more methamphetamine problem.
Rosebud Sioux Tribal Police Captain Ivor Crow Eagle is troubled by gang influence on tribal youth.
They tend to go to the culture that they think that's the perception that it's cool to be a gangster or to be, a gang member. That perception of family, wanting someone that wants them.
Because parents around here aren't really parents, so they go looking for their own family, I guess.
I talk to kids as young as 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, starting there. because unfortunately some of these kids are coming from families where there's an addiction problem that's entrenched, that's deeply rooted within the family and has been for 2 or 3 generations.
Chris Grant is a former Rapid City police detective and leading Native American gang expert.
There's nothing within Native American culture that connects to being a gang member. Part of the reason some of these young people in Indian country move and embrace the gang subculture is because they're disconnected from their own traditional culture.
It's not us at all. And there's been a resurgence in our efforts to go back to our traditions and some dances, some of our ceremonies. We see a lot of some of our children get involved with that. And you see some positive results with that.
For both Sharpfish and Spotted Warbonnet, sports have been their way out of gang activity and have helped them stay in school, a school immersed in Native Lakota culture.
What my grandma always told me was finish school and make something of myself, and that's what I want to do.
Spotted Warbonnet hopes to study biomedical engineering at the South Dakota School of Mines. Sharpfish has his sights set on Duke and now sees himself as a role model for younger children.
I share their pain. I know what they went through, the trauma. There are some kids now that look up to me, and that's really opened my heart. I just really want to change their future. I really want to change the reservations.
And perhaps most importantly, rejecting outside gang culture.
And identifying who they are as a Native American, Lakota.
Grant emphasizes that most Native Americans living on the reservation are not taking part in gang violence. But he says just a small number of people who are can cause an inordinate amount of fear and criminal activity. With Kettleman Investigates, I'm Angela Kennecke.
As far as Native prison gangs and Native street gangs, you can see a video I did on them. But I'll mention some that operate in the Dakotas, which are groups like the Native Mob, which is also active in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Colorado, and I've interviewed a couple of them in Washington State. Members routinely engage in drug trafficking, assault, robbery, and murder. According to my buddy, retired Rapid City Police Department Captain Chris Grant, who I presented with in a few states on gang activity, there are several large street gangs in Rapid City, including the Boys, Gangster Disciples, and the Northside Family. Sureños are also active in both states. Crime statistics confirm that gangs and cartels supply drugs are present on South Dakota and North Dakota reservations. Mexican drug cartels target Indian reservations, using them as drug hubs and trafficking routes. They feel that they can hide their operations better there. Many times, these Mexican nationals that are involved in drug cartels will marry Native American women, so they feel they're protected. However, there is little evidence that cartels control Indian reservation governments or that tribal leaders help these drug traffickers. There have been some instances, however, that I can think of where prison gangs like the Mexican Mafia and the San Manuel Indian Reservation in San Bernardino County infiltrated the tribe. There are also outlaw motorcycle gangs active in the Dakotas. The largest presence of OMGs in South Dakota is the Bandidos, who have chapters in Rapid City and Sioux Falls, as well as their puppet club, Hermanos, that operates in the state. Sons of Silence are active in North Dakota, and El Forasteros have a presence in Sioux City, South Dakota. Of course, one of the biggest biker events in the world is Sturgis, South Dakota, and many clubs show up, including the Hells Angels, who have been known to get into it with other clubs at times, as well as relatively getting along at other times. Vago's MC website says that they are active in South Dakota and North Dakota as well. The Midwest Gang Investigators Association Dakotas chapter is having a training September 15th through 17th, 2026. If you are law enforcement, I highly encourage you to attend. So that's all I have for you on South and North Dakota. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. Before I leave today, I'd like to leave you with a few wise words from Sitting Bull, who was a Hunkpapa Lakota leader, a medicine man, born in the 1830s and died in 1890. The first is, honor your promises. They are the bridges between people. Again, like I said a couple episodes ago, I guess loyalty means different things to different people, but to me it means keeping your promises and having somebody's back, whether it be family or friends. The second quote from Sitting Bull is, if you quarreled with your neighbor, go and make peace before sunset. I don't think Sitting Bull meant sunset of that very evening, but sunset meaning before you die. I've thought about this quite a bit lately as I'm getting up in my years, being 65 years of age. When I go out, I don't want to be angry or bitter. I want to go out with peace and love. That may make sense to some of you, and to some of you, it might sound kind of weak. I know. It's really hard sometimes. And I'm not saying let somebody take advantage of you and disrespect you over and over again. But you have to let that anger go sometime, or you'll dwell on it forever. Don't let other people hold your mind hostage. Get angry, then let it go and move on. Forgive them for their trespasses, for we have all sinned at one time or another. But being a forgiving person is how I'd like to be remembered. And with that, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.